Hello everyone, I'm Gina, and today we're going to be talking about voting for the environment. So before we start, we just want to say that we are here to endorse the environment. We don't want to endorse any particular candidate or any party. We're not going to be talking politics. And we also do not and shall not discriminate on the basis of race, color, religion, gender, gender expression, age, national origin, disability, marital status, sexual orientation, military status, or political party in any of our activities, and that includes today. What we are here to do is to advocate for the environment, and two major parts of advocacy include being aware of current legislation and voting. So those are the two things that we're going to talk about today. We will start with covering some recent legislation from the past few years so that we can understand the current state of environmental policy before we get to voting. So the current administration intended to reverse, revoke, or roll back a total of 100 environmental rules and regulations. So far, they have completed 68 of those rollbacks, with 32 in progress. The reason why they are doing this is because they do not believe climate change will have the destructive effects that scientists are claiming it will, and their priorities instead for US to be energy independent through fossil fuels. Here is an image from the New York Times, which shows the total number from different categories of different environmental rollbacks that they've completed or are in progress. So we're going to be talking about some of these, some of the most notable from different categories, including infrastructure and energy development. So the first one we have, which is a very important change, was to the National Environmental Policy Act. The National Environmental Policy Act requires the federal government to analyze the impact of a major project or federal action on the environment, as well as to seek public input before they approve it. In July, the current administration changed the way this law is implemented in order to speed up the permit process for infrastructure projects such as pipelines, highways, and power plants. Certain projects and activities are now exempt from environmental review altogether, while the review process for others is now shortened by a new 1 to 2 year deadline for that review process. And one of the most contentious changes was allowing the federal agencies to ignore indirect climate impacts of certain infrastructure projects. Next in this section, we have the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. So after a long debate, the US Department of the Interior has opened up 1.5 million acres of Alaska's Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to oil and gas drilling. So not only will this contribute to climate change, but it will also threaten the ecosystem and species that live there that include caribou and polar bears. It also poses a threat to the ancestral lands and traditions of many indigenous groups who have lived there for thousands of years. The next segment we have is water quality and animals. So there has recently been changes to the Clean Water Act. In September of 2019, an Obama-era regulation called the Waters of the United States rule was repealed. And in June of this year, it was replaced with the Navigable Waters Protection Rule. Both of these rules deal with the definition of the phrase waters of the United States, which is used in the Clean Water Act. The Obama-era regulations sought to clarify and widen this definition, and it ultimately provided protections for 60% of US waterways. The new Navigable Waters Protection Rule restricts the definition of waters of the United States to navigable waters. This ends up excluding wetlands that are not adjacent to large bodies of water, some seasonal and ephemeral streams that only run for part of the year, and groundwater. Overall, this new rule excludes 18% of streams nationwide from pollution protections, and it opens up as much as 51% of wetlands to development. Next, we have changes to the Endangered Species Act. So in August of last year, a list of revisions to the Endangered Species Act was announced. The Interior Secretary, David Bernhardt, claimed that these changes would modernize and increase the transparency and efficiency of the Endangered Species Act. However, many environmental groups opposed changes to this act, which has saved species like the bald eagle, grizzly bears, and the California condor. So one revision made was limiting the protections for threatened species. Although they're just one step below endangered, threatened species will now not be afforded the same protections as endangered species. Another change was hindering the ability for regulators to take climate change into consideration when evaluating a species for the list. This especially hurts species that are losing habitat from global warming, since the main concern would be the land that the species currently occupies, not what their possible decreased habitat would be in the future. Our last section is emissions and climate change. This April, there were changes made to an Obama-era rule limiting emissions of mercury, which is a heavy metal that can cause brain damage, harm to pregnant women, and developmental problems in children. The restrictions on mercury were not lifted, but the way the benefits and the costs of restricting mercury emissions are calculated has been changed. So now the costs of limiting mercury will take precedence over the health benefits when they're deciding whether to restrict it or not. This will not only make it easier to loosen restrictions on mercury in the future, but also many other hazardous pollutants. In regards to climate change, the current administration has planned to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement. And they also replaced the Obama-era Clean Power Plan, which would have set strict national limits on carbon emissions from coal and gas-fired power plants. The new version, the Affordable Clean Energy Rule, sets much more modest requirements and mostly allows states to set their own emission standards. This could create the desired effect if states are committed to reducing carbon emissions, or it could allow states that are not interested in this to set more lenient restrictions. This could also pose a threat to any species traveling between states that have varying emissions standards. So speaking of specific states' stances on the environment, we're now going to talk about California's outlook versus the federal government. So California has been fighting to keep higher environmental standards by suing many of the previously discussed changes. So in total, California has sued the current administration 100 times, and over half of those have to do with the environment, where California has claimed that the administration violated certain environmental rules. Some of these suits include, and this one you've probably heard of, the federal government trying to revoke California's authority to set stricter auto emission standards than the federal government. They also sued over changes to the National Environmental Policy Act, which we previously discussed, as well as the new clean water rules, and about loosening restrictions on methane emissions, which is also a greenhouse gas. And finally, they're suing over less protections for migratory birds. And the migratory bird suit has actually succeeded, and the Migratory Bird Act was put back to the way it was before it was changed by the administration. But except for the migratory bird suit, all of these are pending. So we will see how they go. Okay. And next, we are going to talk about activating your right to vote. So if any of those current events or important issues inspire you to speak out or try to make a change, one of the best ways to do so is voting. So in this next section, we will talk about how to activate your right as a citizen to vote. If anyone is wondering why vote, here is why. So the best way to change how people interact with the environment is by changing their governing bodies. And if they are told by the government to obey certain laws that protect the environment, they're more likely to do so. Also, many of the environmental problems we face are very large scale, like climate change, and so they're related to the actions of government or big businesses. And the way to change those actions is through new laws and regulations. Also, voting is how we as citizens can change the government. It is our responsibility and ability as citizens to vote and have our voice heard in government. We can do this by deciding directly on laws on the ballot or by electing people who share our beliefs and will uphold our values in government. Also, this is very important, is that if you're not voting, your concerns aren't going to be included in polls that politicians are using. So politicians are our representatives and they're responsible for paying attention to our concerns and being a delegate to the government. However, if you're not voting, they're probably not going to be looking at your requests and needs because they are looking at the wants and needs of people who are voting primarily so that they can get reelected and continue to serve. So the first step in activating your right to vote is to educate yourself. So we have some tips on that, and that is to research all of the laws and candidates that are going to be showing up on your ballot, whether it's national, state, or local, as in county or city. Also, it's important to vote on what you know. So make sure that whatever you vote on, you have researched, but don't make that stop you from voting, because it is okay if you don't have time to research everything. You can leave certain things blank on the ballot if you did not have time to research it and just don't know enough to decide. That is perfectly okay. We want you to be voting on things that you're confident about. So here are some sources in case you wanted to get researching. We have ballotpedia.org and vote.org, which can help you with all levels of government, as well as cavotes.org, which will help you with whatever's on the California ballot, and ocvote.com for just Orange County. And keep in mind that this is a limited list of websites, and there are many, many other helpful sources that you can look up. If you also have certain organizations or unions that you support, they often send out their opinions on upcoming elections, and you can use that to help you research. And step 2 is to register. So here is the link to register online, registertovote.ca.gov. It's super quick and easy to register online. If you are registering online, that deadline is no later than October 19th. If you are registering by mail, it has to be postmarked by the same date, October 19th. But if you decide to register in person, you can do that all the way up to Election Day. You can register on Election Day through same-day registration. Also keep in mind that if you're 16 or 17 watching this thinking it doesn't apply to you because you're not 18 yet and you can't vote, you can pre-register to vote at this same link, registertovote.ca.gov, and you'll be ready to vote when you turn 18. Also, if you are turning 18 by or on Election Day, you can still vote. So make sure you're pre-registered so that you're ready to vote when you turn 18. Step 3 is, of course, to vote, and there are many ways to do so. This year, because of the pandemic, all active registered voters will receive a vote by mail ballot. So you can use this by mail ballot and send it in the USPS, or you can find a ballot drop box near you and drop it off there, or you can drop it off at vote centers. Or if you choose to vote in person, you can go to vote centers and vote in person. You can go to pop-up voting sites that are open for a shorter amount of time. And also there's an option to go to our OC super site for voting, and that is the Honda Center. So it's going to be having large area for in-person voting so that you can spread out. It also offers drive-through voting and drive-through mail ballot drop-offs. And I put the address for the Honda Center right there in case you need it. Also, something to keep in mind is that polling places have been replaced by vote centers, which are open for 5 days instead of 1. So the 5 days leading up to the election, you'll be able to vote. You can go there and vote in person, or you can drop off your ballot like I talked about, or you can just get any assistance you might need, whether it's registering or getting a replacement ballot. So if you want any more information on voting, you can go to ocvote.org/.com/voting, and this will have any other information you might need for local Orange County, whether it's locations of ballot drop boxes or locations of vote centers and pop-up voting sites. So step 4 to activating your right to vote is encouraging others to vote, because every voice matters, and one vote may not enact change, but if we are all using our voices to talk about what we care about, we can get change in the government. An interesting statistic is that almost half of eligible voters, about 100 million people, did not vote in the 2016 election. And a number from Environmental Voter Project is that over 15 million environmentalists don't vote. So it's really important to encourage others who care about the environment, or just anyone in general, to get out there and vote so that they can make change about what they believe in. And finally, step 5 is to stay involved after you voted. So you can do this by following certain organizations that you support. Like I talked about, they often have information about upcoming elections. Or you can sign petitions to continue advocating for what you believe in. You can also contact your OC representatives about things you care about. So if anybody needs this map, I have a map of Orange County congressional districts, so that you can see what district you're in and who your congressman or woman is, so that you can contact them. And I will come back to that at the end, so in case anybody needs it. And finally, we challenge you to vote, number 1, and then to take a photo of your sticker or with your sticker and to post that on social media, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, whatever platform you prefer, but make sure you tag us at OC Habitats to show us that you are willing to vote for the environment. And here I will go back to the slide in case you need it. But thank you for listening, everybody. Make sure you get involved and make sure you get out to vote so that we can continue advocating for the environment.